Shields up, Ironbreakers, and welcome back to Elden Ring. As per usual, whenever From Software does pretty much anything online, whether that is release a brand new video game, release a new piece of DLC, which happens to be the case right now, or even just sneeze in the wrong way, the online discourse immediately shifts back to the difficulty and accessibility of From Software's Souls titles. This is something that we've seen time and time again, and in today's video I'm not really going to try to change your mind on this particular topic, but I would like to express the reasoning as to why these things are so important to us, because I see it misconstrued quite often, and it is actually a little bit frustrating. One of the things that is also extremely frustrating when it comes to this is that From Software are not the only ones putting out Souls games. I mean, they have obviously created the Soulsborne genre, so to speak, but there's actually quite a lot of other companies nowadays which are creating their own brand of Souls-likes. And one of the things that I always find interesting is that whenever you have another Souls-like coming out, there usually isn't quite as much discourse surrounding this particular topic in those games. So recent examples would be Lies of P and Lords of the Fallen. While you might see like one or two videos, a couple of forum posts really talking about, oh my god, these games are so hard, we need an easy mode, we need more accessibility, we need all these things, usually with these other games, these topics aren't quite as prevalent. Which, you can attribute that to the fact that the Souls games produced by From Software are far more popular, but I kind of feel like if you feel this way about these particular games, you should also feel that way about other video games that are challenging in their own ways, and this should be a topic that should be surfaced more often. It just feels a lot of times like a lot of this discourse is more so manufactured than authentic, but I'm not making that claim. I'm just saying that the popularity is definitely an influence in how prevalent the discourse is. Now, like I said at the start, you're going to have your own preconceived notions, and I'm going to tell you why these things are more of a feature than a problem for a majority of this player base, and why, in fact, unlike what a lot of people have been saying, the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC is not too hard. As a matter of fact, I actually think that the difficulty is pretty much in line with what I would expect. And by the way, I want you to understand something. Me, as a player, I am actually okay that eventually From Software makes a video game that I am not able to finish. I don't actually see this as a failure on their part, even if a lot of people would. I see it as, I'm growing older. I'm losing my twitch reflexes. I'm 42 years old. And I'm not saying this, oh my god, I'm so old. I'm like a cadaver by now. It's like, no, but fundamentally, these are perishable skills. Your twitch reflexes are not going to last you up until you're 80. Okay, this is just the way that these things are going to be. And it is going to be up to you whether or not you're going to be comfortable getting to a point in a video game where you're just like, oh, I'm just not going to be able to beat this. Well, that's too bad. Maybe I'll just play other video games now that are going to be a little bit easier and more appropriate for me. And an interesting thing that I always find is that there's a lot of people that whenever I express the fact that I appreciate the difficulty and challenging aspects of Souls games, they start labeling me as a gatekeeper. Now, if I'm a gatekeeper, I'm doing a pretty piss-poor job at it because the whole foundation of this channel is to try and get people into video games that are outside of their comfort zone. So like, for instance, some of the first videos that I put in this channel were videos where I would be telling people, hey, look, Dark Souls is actually not that hard. Let me explain to you some of the concepts that you might be missing that are going to make things a little bit easier for you. This was literally how I kind of got started on this channel on YouTube. This is not how I got started on YouTube, that's a different story, but on this specific channel, that's how things kind of like got started. And this is one of the things that I've always pushed, not just for Dark Souls, but, also for Monster Hunter. Like when Monster Hunter World came out in 2018, that was a massive foundation of my channel because a lot of people are like, oh, what is this game? This seems complicated. It looks like this game was more of a Japanese type of thing. Now it's actually coming to the West in full force. How does this work? And a lot of people would come in saying things like, oh, Dark Souls is clunky or Monster Hunter is clunky. And I'd be like, no. Let me explain to you how things work and you will understand. And a lot of people, I feel like, got into these games because of me. So if I'm a gatekeeper, I feel like I'm doing a pretty piss poor job at it. But anyways, no, that is not my intention. As a matter of fact, I want as many people as possible to play these video games. But I feel like if you're going to join in on a video game like this, you need to be able to play it on its own terms. And unfortunately, this does mean that these games are not going to be for everyone. And for this, I would actually like to bring out a quote from Gene Park, who was in a podcast with me very recently here on the channel, and I feel like this quote is extremely appropriate. So let's go ahead and roll that clip.
Like, I think people are getting the whole slogan "games are for everyone" a little bit twisted. You know,
Oh yeah.
games are for everybody. Yes, the medium of video games are for everybody. Individual video games are not for everybody. That is simply impossible to do. To make video games that are for every single person. So, FromSoft is deciding, you know what, we're just not even going to try to do that. You know, we're just going to try to make the game we want.
And I very much agree with Gene and what he says here, which is to say that yes, video games, they're for everyone. And, you know, there's going to be a video game out there for everyone, a video game that you're going to enjoy. But individual video games cannot possibly be for everyone. And we're going to be tackling some of the criticism that we've seen when it comes to the Souls genre. Now, one of the things that I want to address right off the bat is this pause button functionality that a lot of people have been asking for when it comes to Souls games. And the reasoning I want to start with that one is because, you know, we recently had a little bit of Twitter drama where I quote tweeted something that Alana Pierce says that I disagreed with, and a lot of people came after me for that. But I don't really want to dive too deeply into that. I just want to dive deeper on the actual subject at hand, which was the whole notion of a pause button. So the reason why the Dark Souls games, as well as, you know, this started with Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3 games do not have a pause button is because, at least from my interpretation initially, is because you could be invaded by other players at any point in time. And this was very much a design decision. This is a game that is going to be played while you are online, and while you are online, you're going to be able to be invaded by another player at any point. You're never really safe. If you need to take a break from the game, you need to actually turn off the game, not just pause it where it is and whatever, right? So that's one of the notions surrounding the whole pause thing. However, you know, you can still play the game in offline mode. This is very much something that you can do. You can just, like, even back in Demon Souls on PlayStation 3, because I remember it wasn't as easy to do it on the PS3. You'd have to, like, yank out the cord or whatever. But you could fundamentally play the game entirely offline if that was something that you wanted to do. And so in that point, I do feel that it is fair to ask, okay, why don't we have a pause button then? But now I ask you, well, you know, we've had this complaint since the Demon Souls days. Why can't I pause my game? And Dark Souls come out and you still can't pause it. And it's like, why can't I pause Dark Souls? And Dark Souls 2 come out and you still can't pause it. Like, why can't I pause my game? And Bloodborne comes out and you still can't pause it. Why can't I pause my game? What is the deal here? Dark Souls 3 comes out, you still can't pause it. And then finally Sekiro comes out, and that one you can pause. But fundamentally, if you look at Sekiro, you will find that this is a game that is very different from the Souls genre, even though, you know, there's some mechanics here that have been used from other Souls video games and that have also been implemented in Elden Ring. Sekiro by itself is very much a different thing. You don't really have builds per se. You don't really have any multiplayer component whatsoever, which could be a justification as to why, hey, you can pause this one because there's no multiplayer. But I think there might be more to it than just that. Because, again, you can play these games offline. And now it's actually a much simpler option where you can just tell the game, hey, don't connect to the servers. I want to play offline. I don't want to be invaded. I don't want to deal with anything of online stuff. As a matter of fact, my first playthroughs, usually I even do completely offline. And the reasoning behind that is because I don't want to see messages from other players, which is, you know, another online mechanic of the Souls games. I don't want to see messages because they can spoil, like, secret passages, or you start seeing a bunch of blood pools and you're like, oh, there's going to be a trap up ahead. You know, I like being surprised by those things on my very first playthrough, and then on subsequent playthroughs I'll go through and I'll watch all of the messages and the blood splatters and all that stuff and find out secrets that I might have missed and whatnot. And that's kind of like the way that I interact with it. But even when you're playing offline, you still can't pause. Now, there are ways of pausing the game, like if you go into the explanation menu into the game, you can, you know, the game effectively pauses. But fundamentally, I begin to question, considering that it's been so many games where people have complained about this very specific feature. And for those of you that aren't aware, From Software does look at player feedback, as we will talk about further when we talk about difficulty in Shadow of the Erdtree. From Software does look at player feedback, but still they have chosen not to implement a pause functionality in the game. I believe there's even mods that do that. But the developers themselves, they've like, no, there's no pause in our game. Now, I would say that there is a certain value to not having pause in terms of how you feel whenever you're in the game, because basically you feel like, oh, I can't stop. When you're playing the game demands you to be focused on the game. You need to be focused on what's happening on the game, and if you want to put the game down, you need to quit the game entirely. You can't just like pick it back up and put it back down on a whim, like a lot of video games allow you to. And I'm not against pause in video games. Hell, I'm not even against pause in Elden Ring. I use a pause-like function. You know what my pause-like function is? I'll either die because, if I need to pay attention to something else, I'll just be like, okay, guess I'm dying and I'll come back and pick up my souls later. Or I will straight up quit the game real quick, because you can just you can press the start button, go into the, the thing where you just quit the game. It's pretty easy to just quit the game very, very fast. And once you quit the game, this actually, that's your pause. Because you quit the game, and then when you load back in, the game is saved exactly where you were when you quit the game. If you happen to be fighting a boss, the game actually teleports you outside of the boss arena, and you can reset the encounter and go again. Or hell, you can even go inside the boss arena in case you've been dying repeatedly to this boss. You can go in there, pick up your runes, quit the game, and the game will shoot you back outside the boss arena so that you can recover your runes and go do your business. So, quitting the game is fairly easy. Doing the whole explanation menu thing, that's also fairly easy. But the developers seem hesitant to put in a pause. Now, like I said, I'm not against it unless there is a reason. So for instance, if Miyazaki comes out and says, no, I don't want you guys pausing the game because I want you to be fully immersed at all times, I will support that developer decision, because I do believe that Miyazaki and his team have a much better understanding of what is good for video games than what a lot of us online are able to recognize. Do we really think that somebody who has developed, you got your Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, that's 5 games, Sekiro, that's 6 games plus Elden Ring, 7 games, that in my eyes, they're all amazing. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Dark Souls 2 kind of sucks. And it's like, look, in my opinion, Dark Souls 2 is the worst Souls game, but it's still a really good game all around. But people are going to disagree with that. It's whatever you see things however you feel like seeing them. But fundamentally, you're going to talk about a team that has put out 7 absolute bangers. And again, if you don't like Dark Souls 2, let's just say 6. Or if for some reason you don't like Sekiro, because I know a lot of people actually did not enjoy Sekiro, which is fine. I love it. I think Sekiro is awesome. But whatever. Let's say at the bare minimum, these people have made 5 banger games. And you're going to jump on Twitter or, on YouTube and make a video. It's like, actually, you know what? I think they should just put a pause button. And what if Miyazaki is to say, actually, no, I don't think so. I don't like the idea of having a pause button. I believe that it detracts from immersion. It detracts from a lot of other design philosophies that I have around this game. I want the game to be running at all times whenever you are inside the game. How are we actually going to make the argument over someone that has, again, 5 games, banger experiences all around, and we're somehow going to assume that we know better? Like I said, I'm not opposed to a pause button. I'm not entirely opposed to it, unless From Software says, no, we don't want one. At that point, I'd be like, then I don't think there should be one. Because I believe that they know what is best for the game better than me and better than a lot of other people online. Now, one of the things that usually comes up whenever it comes to this is a lot of people like to say, oh, Rurikhan is just a From Software fanboy. As Cowboy said the other day on our podcast, we're called From Softies, which I think is pretty good. But it's like, I've had a lot of people tell me that, oh, you're just a From Software fanboy. Anything they do is going to be perfectly fine with you. And this is wrong. I've actually criticized quite a few things that From Software has done in the past. So, for instance, when it comes to Dark Souls 2, I heavily criticized the DLC that includes that location called the Frigid Outskirts, which I still think it's one of the worst locations ever in a Souls game. I mean, hell, I heavily criticized a lot of things in Dark Souls 2, so like the Frigid Outskirts, Shrine of Amana, I always said it's a terrible zone. I've always said that I feel like Dark Souls 2 outstays its welcome quite a bit. The runbacks of Sir Alone, the runbacks of Blue Smelter Demon. Like, there's a lot of things that I've criticized, particularly in Dark Souls 2, but not just Dark Souls 2. I've also heavily criticized the Ringed City DLC for Dark Souls 3, which I'll remain to this day. Like, I don't like it. I don't like the Ringed City, specifically because a lot of the mechanics that they have around that DLC, which, you know, I understand a lot of people like it, but the thing is, I'm not going out there saying like, you need to change this DLC so that it becomes like I like it. No, there's clearly an audience that really appreciates the Ringed City DLC. There's clearly an audience that absolutely loves Midir. I can't stand Midir. I think it's one of the worst boss fights From Software has ever done. But, you know, that's just my opinion on it. But I just find it interesting that so many people like to call me a blind fanboy when I've blatantly criticized a lot of the things that From Software has done. The difference is, I don't necessarily am going to demand them to change the design of the game to suit my personal preferences. There are things that I'm not going to like about it. Hell, there's things that I don't like about Elden Ring. For instance, while I really appreciate my very first ever playthrough in Elden Ring, I find that it is a lot harder for me to replay Elden Ring just because of the way in which I play video games whenever it comes to Souls games, which is I like to pick up every single item in the game. Even if I'm never going to use it, I like to pick it up. I like to have it. It's comforting. Feels nice to have all of the things because I've always played Souls games like that. Even in Dark Souls 1, one of the examples that I always remember is when you're in New Londo. No, not New Londo, Anor Londo, right? And there's that statue where you have to go on a big roundabout thing and you have to go around and go to the rafters on a different side and whatnot. And then eventually you get to a specific spot in the game and you get to pick up the friggin' Divine Blessing. And I'm like, I'm never going to use this Divine Blessing, but I need to have it. And because I like playing these video games like this, it makes subsequent playthroughs of Elden Ring very much harder than, pretty much any other Souls game. But, this is something that I understand. There's an advantage and a disadvantage to it because your first playthrough is going to be much more special because of it. That was also one of the criticisms that I've put in my review of Shadow of the Erdtree. It's like, as a con, like, I did like a small pros and cons list at the end of it. And I was like, one of the cons that I said is in order for you to jump back into this DLC, if you want to do like a New Game Plus character, or if you want to make a brand new character and jump back into the DLC, you have to play through the entirety. Well, not the entirety, but you have to do a decent chunk of the base game of Elden Ring. So it's like, I've done criticisms to From Software design. I just don't believe that, I know better than what a lot of the developers are doing. I'll express my criticisms. I'm not going to tell them, you need to change this game so that it becomes better for me. And that is one of the things that kind of really, I feel the need sometimes to voice my disagreement whenever people are like, this game would be much better if they did this. I question, would it? I don't know. Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't. Clearly, they don't feel that way. And that's kind of like where I land when it comes to the pause. I'm not opposed to it. I think that there are plenty of ways of dealing with, needing to step away from Elden Ring. It's a super easy game to step away from as far as I'm concerned. A lot of people see like, oh, I'm going to lose so much progress. It's like, you were probably going to die anyway. Let's just be real, okay? You were probably going to die anyway. I highly doubt that you're in a situation where it's like, oh my God, there's somebody at my door. If only the mailman hadn't come at this critical moment, I would have succeeded in my 110th attempt of killing this boss. Let's just be reasonable here, okay? You're going to die. You're going to respawn back at the bonfire. That's it. You might even lose your runes. Hell, I lost 800,000 runes in the DLC. Not really that big of a deal. You can farm those back up. It's not even that hard. So, that's kind of like where I land with that stuff. Now, another thing that always comes around, because, you're talking about accessibility and difficulty and all this stuff, I want to make another thing perfectly clear. From Software is not as, as huge of a developer as someone like, let's say, Ubisoft and Electronic Arts and Activision. Like, these are much bigger studios. So therefore, they can afford to devote much more resources to accessibility things. And now it's like, I am very much for accessibility settings. So for instance, full button remapping. I don't know if that's on Elden Ring or not, because I usually just use default bindings, but if it's not, it definitely should be. So full button remapping is a big one. There aren't really anything that I can remember where you're supposed to mash buttons. So I don't think that is a problem, but if that was a thing, like, sometimes you have some QTEs where you're supposed to mash buttons, having a setting there that lets you just like hold the button down for people that have, maybe like some arthritis or some tendonitis or some of that stuff, I think that is another really good accessibility option. High contrast, like some of the stuff we've seen in The Last of Us and whatnot, I think that is cool. Text-to-speech, I think that is also really cool features to have and to implement into a video game. But having said that, not every studio has the resources to dedicate to all of these things. And when making that decision, this is something that you need to consider. I want you guys to understand. Yes, I'm down. More accessibility options, text-to-speech stuff, high contrast, colorblind modes, friggin', better audio experiences for people that have audio, they can't hear right. The more of those things, the better. But I think that the moment that you start messing with difficulty, you end up messing up a huge part of what makes Elden Ring or Dark Souls. And this is the thing. I don't even think that these games are that hard. I think they are challenging, but fair, which is always this is always one of the things that attracted me to this particular genre more than anything else. It's how a lot of things will feel challenging. They might even feel almost impossible to overcome, but that just makes it so much better when you eventually do overcome that by any means necessary. I want you to understand, by any means necessary. Whether that is, you're going to pick up a weapon that deals more damage, you're going to start using a shield, you're going to use summons, you're going to summon other players, not just Ash summons, but summon other players to help you out. Anything goes. When it comes to defeating these games, you get to choose your own level of difficulty. And that's the beauty of it. Everybody has the same experience, but they're given the same tools, and they get to organically decide how hard they want to make the experience for themselves. And anyone that's going to come in later and be like, well, you didn't really beat it if you did this. It's like, those people are dumb, and nobody's listening to them, realistically speaking. And if you do listen to them, you shouldn't. Because that is the whole point of these games, is to overcome difficulty by any means necessary. Now, if you want to self-impose challenges like Rune level 1, no summons, only upgrade a certain weapon up to this level, no Ashes of War, whatever you decide, that is your decision. Just be aware the tools are there for you to make things easier. And that is one of the beauties of this game. It is the organic difficulty. You get to choose the level of challenge at which you tackle it. And therefore, the reality is nobody is really ever left out. Unless, there are some more severe disabilities that can become very debilitating when it comes to playing these video games. Like, maybe somebody that doesn't have, for some reason, they've lost use of their hands or something like that. Yeah, I feel really bad. And I hope that there's some technology that we can develop, like there might be special controllers, and hopefully the game supports those controllers. Like I've heard from people that there do exist some players that use special like apparatus to use breathing tubes and whatnot to kind of like do inputs. There's players beating the game with different types of inputs, and I'm all for that. Enable all of those things so that those players can have a better time, 100%. But at a certain point, as a developer, you have to consider, should they, as a baseline for the experience they're designing, is that something that they need to consider, right? Oh, we need to make sure that our game is playable by people that don't have hands. I know that this is going to sound a little bit harsh, and I really want as many people as possible to play these games. I do. But you get to a certain point where I kind of feel like those requests are a little bit unreasonable. But anyways, when it comes to the difficulty side of things, I'm going to go ahead and quote Miyazaki in something that he said in a recent interview with The Guardian. And this is his quote. If we really wanted the whole world to play the game, we could just crank the difficulty down more and more. But that wasn't the right approach. Had we taken that approach, I don't think the game would have done what it did, because the sense of achievement that players gain from overcoming these hurdles is such a fundamental part of the experience. Turning down difficulty would strip the game of that joy, which in my eyes would break the game itself. So understand that when it comes to talking about the difficulty and the challenge levels of what we experience in Elden Ring, this is very much intended. And the point isn't even how hard the game is. The point is the feeling that you get when you overcome those challenges. Now, naturally, this is going to mean that for some people, they're never going to get that feeling because quite simply the game is too challenging. And, there are other video games that I personally don't play. So, for instance, if we look at modern first-person shooters, I feel like I don't have the twitch reflexes or even an eyesight nowadays that is good enough for me to keep tabs on everything that is happening on screen to be able to really perform in a game like that, like, say, for instance, something like a Call of Duty. So, if I go and I play those games, I'm going to get completely destroyed. Maybe eventually I'll be able to overcome some of my limitations and become a little bit better at those games, but quite simply, I already know what expects me if I'm going there. So guess what? I don't do it. I already know those games are not for me, so I don't do it. It's kind of like the same thing. I used to play League of Legends back in the day, but one of the things that I've never liked is last-hitting minions. I hate last-hitting minions. I think it's one of the most boring things you can possibly do in a MOBA, which is why I actually really liked Heroes of the Storm much more than League of Legends, but, it is what it is. For a lot of players, they consider last-hitting minions to be, a skill that you acquire. I don't think so, but, to each their own. Fundamentally, I'm not going to jump into League of Legends and go like, okay, game needs to change, no more last-hitting minions because I don't like that. It doesn't make sense. So what do? I don't play the game. I used to play Heroes of the Storm, but I don't even play that anymore because Blizzard, crapped the bed when it came to that game. But that game was much more fun for me than League of Legends ever was, because it was more about the team fights than necessarily, let me farm this lane over and over and over because it's enjoyable, right? As a matter of fact, no, let's not go any deeper into the whole MOBA stuff. But just understand, there are going to be certain genres that I don't dive into because I'm not going to appreciate it. It's just that simple. I don't dive into a lot of horror games because I don't like them. It's not even because, I'm so scared. It's more so I just don't appreciate that gameplay as much. But the players that do appreciate that stuff, they're going to love it. I don't dive that much into survival games, even though I did dip my toes a little bit at the start of this year. But usually I don't even play that many survival games because I don't like the idea, I have to constantly manage my character's thirst and hunger and need to take a poop and all of this stuff. And it's like, this sounds boring. So I don't do it. So I play the video games that I do like. And that's the thing. Whenever it comes to gaming, we're literally spoiled for choice. If you do not like the challenge that is, presented to you in a game like an Elden Ring, or a Dark Souls, or a Sekiro, you don't have to play it. Because most likely that game is just not for you. And I'm sorry, because I want as many people as possible to play these games. And let me tell you why. The reason I want that is because I want these companies to make as much money as possible so that they can turn around and make more of those games that I like. It's the same thing with Monster Hunter. I want as many people as possible to play Monster Hunter and enjoy Monster Hunter so that Capcom can make more Monster Hunter games. This is just the way that I look at things. But fundamentally, I don't want them to change the whole essence of what a game is to accommodate me. And that's pretty much how it goes. Now, difficulty was just one of the things that is usually brought up whenever it comes to Souls games and Elden Ring and all of this stuff. Back in the day, back before this was really a mainstream genre, so to speak, back around the release of the original Dark Souls, a lot of people would complain about other things. So difficulty was just kind of like a small part of the discussion. Another one would be the clunky combat. A lot of people would complain about the combat of the original Dark Souls. Hell, people complain about the combat of the original Dark Souls today. They would say, oh my god, my dude is stuck in an animation for 3 hours. Because they didn't understand that the concept of a Souls game is to commit to animations. Most people understand that nowadays. But back in the day, people really didn't understand that concept. To them, it was like, what do you mean I can't roll out of an animation once I commit to it? This is stupid. This makes no sense. Why is my guy stuck in there for 2 hours, swinging his big sword? It's like, well, might have something to do with the fact that swinging a big sword takes time and effort, and that is being represented in the game in a realistic manner that makes the combat more believable, which is one of the reasons why I personally enjoyed the combat as much as I did. Big, meaty swings of swords that where you actually can feel the weight of the blows that you are landing on your enemies, because not a lot of games are able to do that adequately, and it's very frustrating when they don't, because I'm constantly thinking, man, that big meaty chop of my sword just feels great. But the thing is, to get that feeling, you need that animation commitment. So if From Software was to just listen to what anybody says, we would have had easy mode with the whole difficulty thing. We would have had no animation commitment. We'd be able to roll cancel out of pretty much any animation that we wanted to, so there'd be no animation commitment whatsoever, and that would arguably make the game significantly worse. Another complaint, which still happens today, is the storytelling. There's still a lot of people that seem to believe that this game doesn't have any lore or story of any kind, which is easily debunked if you just see how successful channels are that do lore explorations, whether it is Zeostorm, Ratatosker, Vati Vidya, Smotown. There's a new dude that I found recently called Bandit, and there's plenty more. Like, I see lore speculation all over the place when it comes to these games, and if you go and you look up those videos, they're massively successful. That should tell you something about the quality of these stories. The thing is, the way in which the story is told, it is supposed to leave a lot of things open for interpretation. A lot of people appreciate that type of storytelling. Mostly people who play Souls games actually enjoy that type of storytelling. A lot of people don't. A lot of people prefer more narrative-driven storytelling. Me personally, I like both. I like them both. One of my favorite stories ever is actually the story of Final Fantasy XIV, which is very much, traditional narrative told to you. But that is not to say that I don't really appreciate what is done in Souls games. And fundamentally, if we were to just listen to every little complaint that happens surrounding the Souls games, we would have had an easy mode. We wouldn't have animation commitment, which means every single fight in this game would be a roll spam, trying to land big damage without any commitment whatsoever. We wouldn't have the good storytelling. And then we come to another complaint, which is invasions. People have always complained about invasions, and this is going to be an extremely important point, because a lot of times people ask me, Rurikhan, why do you care? Why do you care that people say these things about the video game? Why do you always feel the need to come in and disagree? Why do you feel the need to lecture? And it's like, I hope that people don't see this as a lecture. I'm just trying to express my own point of view when it comes to this type of stuff. But fundamentally, when it comes to invasions, a lot of people don't like the concept of invasions. Now, me, I'm the exact opposite. I love it. I absolutely adore the idea that at any point in time, I can be playing the game and a random person's going to invade me and wreck my face, because that gives me a sense of adrenaline and immersion and danger that I feel when I'm exploring the world that no other game can replicate. I really want you to understand this. No other game, there's not a single other game that can replicate this feeling for me. Okay? So, because when people are talking about like, oh, we want this game to be easier, there's a million other games that you can play that are action RPGs that are easier than Souls. When you're talking about organic invasions of me just being exploring a level and somebody invading me for the sole purpose of killing me, no other game does it like this one. This is a fact. This is not like, some random nonsense that I make. No other game does it. Feel free to go look it up. Have fun. No other game does it like From Software does. And this is a feature that I've always appreciated. I love it. And the thing to me is, one of the reasons why I come to this game is because it has that feature. A lot of people come to play this game in spite of that feature. This is a feature that is undesirable for them, and therefore they go online and they complain about it, and they're like, I don't like this feature's bad, blah, 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 the usual stuff. So this is a particular thing because whenever it comes to invasions, this is something that you can invade if you want to, that you can avoid if you want to play the game solo. You can just play offline. You're never going to get invaded except for NPCs. And here's the thing, even NPC invasions, a lot of people don't like that idea. They don't like the idea that an AI NPC can invade your game, which is very much like just encountering a random mob It's like a trap in the game, except they show up almost as if they were another player. But anyway, there's a lot of people that don't like the invasions mechanic. And they can play offline and they can completely circumvent that. However, if you want to play online, that is a balancing system that they put into the game, which is to say, you can summon somebody to help you progress through the game. The consequence of that is that somebody else can invade you and wreck your day. It's, that's just the way that they've decided to do things, which a lot of people don't appreciate. I can understand. Me personally, I like it a lot, and I think that it is a ton of fun. So we've had invasions in Demon Souls, we've had them in Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, and Dark Souls 2, they were actually more limited because of the soul memory system. It was really wonky. But yeah, and then we had Dark Souls 3, we had invasions in Bloodborne. We didn't have invasions in Sekiro because that's a single-player game. And then, after years and years of complaining, invasions were actually changed. We no longer have invasions in Elden Ring. And this is something that I've talked about, and I particularly discussed it a lot with Tosker, but fundamentally, we don't have invasions in Elden Ring. We really don't. And people are like, well, what do you mean? Clearly you do. You can invade other players. No, you can invite other players to come into your game and fight you. You're never going to be invaded unless you're playing in co-op. If you are playing solo, you will never be invaded. That is something that was completely removed from Elden Ring forever. Whether this is due to community feedback or not, I don't know. But I want to go back to the point that I told you. This is a feature that I personally really enjoy. It is one of the reasons why I came to play these games, and it was something that was fundamentally removed. And again, I don't know if it is because too many people complained about it or what the deal was, but it was removed. And this is a feature that I loved. And it sucks because I can no longer do something that I really enjoyed doing. I had amazing stories that I would always talk about how I was doing a certain thing and somebody invaded and killed me. And again, I understand a lot of people always tell me, oh, I hate doing that. People come in with their twink builds and this and that and the other. And it's like, yeah, that happens too. That's part of your adventure. That's a story that you get to tell. And that was a thing of beauty. And the few times that I've used the Mad Taunter's Tongue in Elden Ring, it's basically like a stream of people coming in until eventually you're overwhelmed and die. That's it. That's all the Taunter's Tongue does. So it's like, I killed, I don't know, it was like 5 or 6 people, and then number 7 got me. It's like, oh, great. That was amazing. It's nonstop, which is not fun. The fun part was when it was not consensual and somebody just invaded me. I don't even invade people. I don't even tend to do that because I don't care that much about the PvP aspect of it. I just like the concept of a random stranger being able to invade my game and wreck me. I think that's fun, and a lot of people don't, and that was changed in the recent entry in the franchise, which I think kind of sucks, but it is what it is. That's something that I've had to accept, and that is something that a lot of people don't really talk about that much. There was actually something that I enjoyed that was brutally changed. And this is why I always feel the need to express whenever I don't agree with something, because, hey, maybe this thing shouldn't be changed. Like, especially when it comes to difficulty, I don't think that difficulty should be changed, and we already talked about that. But let's talk a little bit more about why it's important that From Software retains their design philosophy. And for this, we're going to have to go all the way back to Demon Souls. Now, for those of you that aren't aware, initially, Demon Souls was a project that was deemed a failure internally by From Software before it was even released. They deemed that this was going to fail. This was a game that nobody was interested in. Nobody cared about this game. Nobody even wanted to do it. It was a game that was like, oh, we're a Japanese developer, but we're working on something that's more of a Western RPG, and everybody thought that this was going to flop. So Miyazaki, who at the time was very much like a fledgling programmer at the company, a fledgling developer. I think he had worked on Armored Core or something like that. I'd done research on this a long, long time ago. I didn't do it for this video. But, he was basically still learning the ropes and all of that stuff. And his idea was like, well, this game is already seen as a failure. If I jump in and mess it up even more, nobody's going to care. So I just want to see if my vision is something that can be done. And so here's a quote from that Guardian interview that I talked about. I figured if I could find a way to take control of the game, and in here he's talking about Demon Souls, I could turn it into anything I wanted. Best of all, if my ideas failed, nobody would care because it was already a failure. And now, referring to Elden Ring in the context of this Demon Souls moment. He says, frankly, I don't think it's that different now from when I was making Demon Souls 15 years ago. What I try to foster in our own environment is making sure these younger directors and game designers have a similar experience to what I did when I was working on Demon Souls, where, well, if this game fails, it's not the end of the world. I think that mental state and attitude is what helps people grow. Because you see, right now, in the gaming industry, what we have is an industry of companies that are scared of taking chances. There are so many big monolithic enterprises that bet everything on their next title, and this causes a lot of their developers to basically always be forced to taking the safest possible approach to anything they do. And this is not what Miyazaki did at From Software when he did Demon Souls, and this is also not what Miyazaki wants for the future From Software. He wants people to be able to keep taking these chances. And unless you have developers not being scared of taking all of these chances, you are never going to have amazing experiences like Elden Ring, like Baldur's Gate 3, which, by the way, I would like to reinforce that in an industry where, people are constantly pushing this narrative that like, oh no, game development is so much more expensive and we will never be able to produce video games like we did in the past without filling you full of microtransactions, milking you dry, nickel and diming you at any chance we can. In an industry that is like that, Elden Ring released at $60 and it received exactly one piece of DLC that is bigger than most other video games that are out there right now for $40. Those were the two prices. For $100, which is both things combined, which I'm assuming eventually you're just going to pay like $60, $70 for both things in a bundle or something like that, you are getting, at the very minimum, 200 hours of gameplay with this game plus its DLC. That is a ridiculous value proposition. And again, I say this at the bare minimum. If you play like one character and nothing else, if you go into New Game Plus cycles, it's going to be considerably more. If you try out different builds, it's going to be considerably more. If you play different characters, it's going to be considerably more. If you actually explore the different quest lines that you have, it is going to be considerably more. And again, this amidst an industry where you're being told every single day the reasons why you need to be nickel and dimed, the reasons why you need to be fleeced like a sheep. Everybody is trying to sell you on this thing that's quite simply not true. Again, look at Baldur's Gate 3. Amazing game. Came out. I think I paid like 50 euros for it. Ridiculous value proposition for an outstanding quality product, even if it had a couple of hiccups on the third act, but still, fantastic game. I'll remember that game forever. The experience I've had, amazing. That game's going to be a timeless classic, very much like Elden Ring. And that's why it is important that you have developers that are willing to take a chance. So now let's talk a little bit more about the Elden Ring success and what Miyazaki is doing to mitigate getting to the point where you reach with a lot of these other companies where basically developers don't really get to take a chance on anything. Again, from those two interviews at The Guardian, Elden Ring was in a league of its own in terms of the success. This is Miyazaki speaking, by the way. Elden Ring was in a league of its own in terms of its success and critical acclaim that it has seen, but what we try to do as a company is never assume that it will happen again with our future games. No decision is based on any assumption that, hey, we did it once is going to happen again. Allowing for this rather conservative forecast gives us room to fail, and that in turn results in better games and better decisions. In a roundabout way, I think that assumption of not making another hit, that conservative outlook, is fueling and aiding our game design. So basically, with kind of like the cushion that they've gotten from the success of Elden Ring, Miyazaki can now afford to tank a couple of games if that is what it takes, which allows his team to really flex their creative muscles. Whereas in other companies, it's like, oh, we're making an RPG. Okay, it's expected to be better than our previous RPG, so we have to make sure it has this system and that system and the other system. And you end up getting into this development by committee situation where everybody's trying to weigh in on like, oh, we have to do this, we have to do that, I have to do loot boxes, monetize it this way, monetize it that way, which is ridiculous. And this is one of the things that From Software is not limited by, which is why I think that we really should respect a little bit more what this company has achieved, the prices that they are charging for their games without nickel and diming people, and yet somehow we still feel the need to crap all over the games because they don't cater to every single person in the world, which they shouldn't and they can't. Following through with this thought, again, another Miyazaki quote: budgets, scale, scope, everything has grown to a point where room for failure isn't as tolerated as we think it was in the past. From Software has its own way of hedging risks, so to speak, in that most art projects have a partner who is financing the project. You guys remember back in the day when we were like, why would they use Activision to publish Sekiro? And Epic Name Bro said, because money. And it makes sense. Yep, they get a partner, they finance the project. Why is Bloodborne a Sony exclusive? Because money, because that lets them take crazy chances. And if things explode, the studio doesn't die. That's actually quite genius. From a business management perspective, we're back to the quote, we're not betting everything on any one single project. At the same time, you have to find the right project to allow for failure, whether it's smaller in scope or scale, or it's a smaller module within something bigger. There needs to be room for that. I think that's where a lot of young game directors will be challenged and will be able to learn from it. Making sure you understand and identify where those pockets of failure can be allowed is how we try to grow our talent. Where From Software is right now in terms of scale, I would say Elden Ring is really the limit. We've tapped every resource and talent that we have access to. Scaling it even bigger, I'd have my concerns. Perhaps having multiple projects is the next stage where some of the other younger talent can have the opportunity to manage and direct game design for a smaller project. So fundamentally, Miyazaki is not only making these absolute bangers that we've been enjoying, he's actually trying to create a company culture that allows other directors to also flex their own creative muscles and create their own unique projects within From Software. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more cool projects from Software in the future, which is going to be very interesting indeed. And finally, I saved this one for last. This is Miyazaki as a player and how his experience as a player kind of like informs development. And this one is particularly relevant for the people that say, ooh, summoning is not a valid way of playing the game, or using a great shield is not a valid way of playing the game. And basically, here's what Miyazaki has to say about that. In preparation for Shadow of the Erdtree, I played through the main story of Elden Ring. I want to preface this by saying I absolutely suck at video games. So my approach or playstyle was to use everything I have at my disposal, all the assistance, every scrap of aid the game offers, and also all the knowledge that I have as the architect of the game. The freedom and open world nature of Elden Ring perhaps lowered the barrier to entry, and I might be the one who's benefiting the most from that as a player more than anyone else. It's a very interesting thing, isn't it? All of these ways in which this elitist minority of the Souls community is telling you that you shouldn't play the game is how the creator of the whole genre plays the damn game. Let that sink in.